Edom, is that you? In certain theological frameworks, America's use of Greco-Roman and Egyptian architecture is interpreted as spiritual evidence identifying the United States as modern-day Edom and spiritual Egypt. 1. America as the seed of Edom. In this view, the descendants of Esau, Edom, are identified as the ruling powers of the Western world, having transitioned through the Roman Empire to modern European and American civilizations. The eagle of Edom. Proponents point to Obadiah chapter 1 verse 4, which warns Edom, "Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, thence will I bring thee down." The eagle, used by Rome and the U.S., is seen as Edom's prophetic signature. Architectural continuation. The pervasive use of Greco-Roman temple architecture and government buildings. The U.S. Capitol and Supreme Court, for example, is viewed as a physical revival of the Roman Empire, which these groups identify as Edom's historical seat. 2. Pagan deification and iconography. The inclusion of pagan figures in American monuments is seen as a literal continuation of the idolatry that originally led to Israel's downfall. Apotheosis of Washington. The fresco in the U.S. Capitol dome, depicting George Washington's elevation to godhood, apotheosis among Roman deities, is viewed as a modern form of pagan deification. Egyptian obelisks, the Washington Monument, an Egyptian obelisk, is interpreted as a symbol of the sun god Ra. Its presence in the Capitol identifies America as a spiritual extension of Egypt. The biblical house of bondage, Exodus chapter 20 verse 2. The Great Seal. The pyramid and Eye of Providence on the dollar bill are viewed as occult Egyptian symbols representing the oversight of an Edomite power structure. 3. Connection to Deuteronomy 28. The curses of Deuteronomy 28 are used to identify the true Israelites as those brought to America via the transatlantic slave trade. Back to Egypt and ships. In this framework, Egypt is not a literal geographic location, but a metaphor for bondage. Being brought to a land of Egyptian and Roman symbols, America in ships is seen as the ultimate fulfillment of this curse. Subjugation by Edom. The curse in Deuteronomy 28, the yoke of iron placed upon the neck, is identified as the physical chains of American chattel slavery, administered by what is seen as the Edomite ruling class. Identifying the nation from afar. The nation from afar that comes as swift as the eagle is identified as the United States, linking back to the eagle symbolism of Edom. In essence, these frameworks argue that America's architectural and symbolic landscape is a deliberate spiritual map confirming its identity as the final kingdom of Edom, where the biblical tribes remain under the curses of Deuteronomy 28. The connective tissue exists. The 400 Years of African American History Commission Act, H.R. 1242, was a 2018 U.S. law commemorating the 1619 arrival of Africans at Point Comfort, Virginia. The 400 years time frame frequently draws cultural and spiritual parallels to biblical prophecies in Genesis chapter 15 verse 13 regarding bondage and Deuteronomy 28 regarding covenant consequences. Legislative Overview, H.R. 1242, enacted on January 8, 2018 to mark the 400th anniversary, 1619 to 2019. Established a federal commission to plan programs, support local events, and increase public education regarding the impact of slavery and racial discrimination. Officially concluded its mandate on July 1, 2020. Biblical references. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. God tells Abram, that his descendants will be strangers and oppressed servants in a foreign land for 400 years before being brought out with great wealth. Deuteronomy 28 outlines the blessings for obedience and the severe curses consequences for disobedience to God's covenant, including scatterings and captivity. Cultural and theological connections. African American spiritual history and liberation theology have long used the Exodus narrative and Genesis 15 as a framework to understand the multi-generational trials of chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic racism in America. The 400-year marker, 1619 to 2019, led many faith communities and cultural groups to tie the legislative commemoration of H.R. 1242 directly to biblical motifs of endurance, release, and historical reckoning.